Now let's talk about Section J, procedures. Now you get into the meat and potatoes of the lesson plan. Finally, we get there. Now we start to actually teach the lesson. You're going to describe all the strategies and activities that you will use and that you will involve your students in to accomplish your objectives that you listed back in Section E. K. Opening of the lesson. There's an opening, there's a middle, and there's a closing. Hear me say that. In the opening, you are going to explain in terms of student management how you will activate prior information and knowledge. So if students have prior knowledge of the content that you are teaching, this is where you will explain what you're going to do to activate or call to the forefront for those students so that they can immediately be engaged in the lesson. Notice they're championing the lesson here, and that's the management of the activity that's about to take place, what you can do at each level. Also in the procedures, you will notice that in terms of student management, how will you motivate students for this lesson? So what are you going to do? You've got to get their attention, you've got to get them focused, and then get them ready to learn. So look at the sample lesson plans. This isn't exactly the most exciting entry that you will find in the lesson plans. Many of the other samples have something that's much more creative, so to speak. Notice the steps in all of the procedures are numbered, so it's like a script. After I do number 12, I do number 13, and then I go to 14. So explain to students that they'll be able to use this key vocabulary, show them the book, make inferences, ask students what they feel will happen in the book. All of this is that engagement, getting them involved. Some teachers come in actually dressed in costume for a particular period of history that they're fixing to teach, or a science teacher will do some crazy experiment that gets students really excited, that does, make some loud noise or some kind of explosion or something very visual that gets the students engaged and and prompting them, want to know how I did this? I want to know what caused that? That's what we're going to do today. So anything that gets them engaged, what are you going to do? In terms of student engagement, how will you communicate the learning targets or objectives? Let me just say this has to be included in the lesson plan, and it can be something as simple as you're going to have them written on the board, which is very highly recommended, so students can look up at any time during the lesson and know just exactly what it is you're wanting them to get out of today's lesson. You can also indicate that you would be reading them to them or a combination of the two. So have them written. Read them out loud. Have a student read them out loud to the class and say, yes, these are our targets for today. This is what I want you to get out of today's lesson. Notice number 15, point to the learning target and have the class read it together. Procedures continued. In terms of student engagement, how are you going to introduce the key vocab? Remember, you had to list those previously. Now, how are you going to introduce those? Key vocab. It is key to understanding and being able to comprehend the content of the lesson. So, students will use key vocab to create charts. They'll decode words using strategies that we have in class. The SFA workbooks, that's specific to this lesson, will be passed out to students, and you're going to have them find the key vocab. Some elementary teachers, when reading a chapter or reading a book to students after they've listed all the key vocab on the board or called the vocab to the students' attention, they'll say silently, every time you hear one of the vocab words written, or read, I should say, raise your hand. And that lets you know, as a teacher, just a general overall overview of the class, Let you know, number one, are students paying attention? Number two, are they recognizing the vocab when they hear or see them? Those are just examples. But basically, how are you going to introduce those key vocab? Part L, continuing the procedures section. Remember I said there's an opening and there's a middle? Well, this is where you get into the step-by-step instruction. The middle of the lesson, as it says, is the heart of the lesson. Step-by-step procedures. What you're going to do, what you're going to say. Read this slide as well as all of the sample lesson plans that I provided you. If you don't print them out, you need to at least open them and read them from page to page, from beginning to end. It will make it so much easier for you to write your lesson plans when you see what others have done and how they have detailed their wording to achieve that step-by-step requirement. It's like a script to a play. Here's a continuation. Notice how detailed all of the steps are. What you're going to do, what you're going to say, what you're going to ask, passing out things, asking questions, step by step. As I said earlier, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. Well, here's the closing. In the closing, you have to conduct a review. How you do that review is up to you. Look at the sample lesson plans. There are many, many ways to review what you have taught in a day's lesson. You also have to explain how you're going to get students to focus on what's coming up next. What's happening tomorrow? What's due later this week? Don't forget, unit exam on Friday. Don't forget, written papers, summarizations are due Thursday. Tomorrow, we will continue our exploration of the various layers of the atmosphere, etc., etc. So what I would like to say at this point, before we get into the next section, is parts A through M require you to fill in the sections of the template, leaving the template as it is presented, and then you simply fill in the various sections with the appropriate information. Detail, detail, detail. Also, I cannot impress upon you enough to make sure that you have viewed the PowerPoint in its entirety. This same set of slides is in PowerPoint format in Blackboard. This is simply my way of being able to converse with you since I don't have you in class, pointing out some specific things that will help you to hopefully better understand the writing of lesson plans. It's a difficult thing to teach when you don't have students face-to-face in class. Make sure that you ask me lots of questions. Get clarification before you ever turn the lesson plan in for grading. If you have concerns, if you need me to clarify anything related to the lesson plan process, you need to let me know. Otherwise, I have no way of knowing the degree to which you feel that you are capable of writing your first lesson plan. You choose the subject, the grade level, and then based upon the standards, you can look and see exactly what topics within those subjects are appropriate for the grade level that you have chosen. Again, let me know if you have any questions. Section N. Section N is straightforward. Notice that Section N basically is the reflection analysis of the lesson you've taught. In other words, in the real world, after you've taught a lesson, one of the key concepts that you will find in the teacher ed program is that teachers must be reflective. In other words, you have to look back on the day's instruction and decide for yourself what worked, what didn't work, what would you do again, what would you do differently, what went really well. Oh yes, that was a great activity, students were engaged, I will do that again. You have to fill in section N in the real world after you've taught the lesson. In this class, smiley face, you don't have to fill this in because you are not actually teaching the lesson. You do have to keep section N and its instruction as a part of your lesson plan, even though there is nothing added to that section. You have to keep it on the lesson plan template when you submit yours. Here's what section N looks like in the template. Again, lucky you, you don't have to worry with that in this course, but you will be filling this out when you get to into the real world teaching your lesson plans on a daily basis, especially when you're being K-tipped and your university supervisor is coming back multiple times throughout the school year to see what you're doing, observe you, and then she will, or he or she will always want to see the lesson plans from previous days, and they will look to see if you have been reflective and included this information in your lesson plans when all is said and done.